Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Don't forget to grab a book, review a book if you've read it, grab the music, or just listen for free down on my music only channel, linked in the description. No talkie, just music. Most of it improvised right now. Ton of improvisational music as well as my studio albums and even I think a couple of classical pieces too. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is perfectionism, or polish versus perfectionism, and a little bit of the unrealistic standards that people have right now with music, especially on social media. So I watched this video from Rabea Masad. He's a guitar player from the United Kingdom, and he's a great player, and he does a lot of good YouTube videos, and he just had this YouTube video talking about how we have these really unrealistic standards for how guitar players are supposed to sound on social media. And I think that has to do with all of the incentives that go with social media. The desire is to have this highly technical, whatever, very virtuosic, very athletic, let's say, and to have it be perfect. So under those sorts of pressures where you're trying to get as much attention as possible and impress as many people as possible, and you have a legion of people ready to tear you down to the nibby nubs for any kind of mistake, what do people do? Well, they mime their guitar parts, or they will spend an hour doing takes to get a 1 minute chunk of some highly technical part of a song in order to put it on TikTok or Instagram or a YouTube short or something like that. So there's problems with that, right? So if you're miming, first of all, you're faking it. So you're just pretending to do it. Or maybe you're miming over a studio recording where you've quantized all the rhythms. So the rhythm's right on the click track. Everything's perfect. You've pitch corrected things. You've done whatever you need to do to make it perfect. And then you just kind of mime the part on top of it. And guys have had to respond to that by just the sound of the electric guitar with nothing, no amp. So it sounds like crap, just to prove that, yeah, I can actually play the highly technical part that I'm trying to show for you guys. But it creates a really unrealistic standard. And there's a lot of problems with that unrealistic standard. So the first problem with the unrealistic standard is that you're going to be spending your time doing things that aren't going to help you grow as an artist. And it's really easy to do this when you're kind of new on your artistic journey. If you spend an hour doing takes to get that 1 minute thing correct for Instagram, not saying you don't want to do that because it may help grow your presence or whatever, but that hour could have been spent learning new music, learning a new etude, focusing on technique that you're not great at yet, rather than trying to polish into a perfect state some really short little section of your music. Going way back in time, I was a classical guitar player, right? I was a classical guitar player in another life. This channel actually started as a classical guitar channel. I taught classical guitar at the collegiate level. I performed. I gigged 4 nights a week for years. And I decided to stop doing it. There's a lot of reasons. I had a whole video on it. Hearing loss was part of it, but a big part of it was kind of the toxic scene of classical guitar. I just got exhausted from playing the same music over and over again as well. But there was a really toxic scene with classical guitar. There's classical guitar competitions. There's violin competitions as well. So you can kind of think, and piano competitions, kind of same area. The focus of the guitar competition was perfection, technical perfection, meaning you never buzz a note, you never miss a note. Everything is very correct tempo, everything's good. You don't break the sound of your guitar. And I remember I did guitar competitions. I never won one, but I did well in a couple of them. And the guys who won them, they were really sounded like robots. And I remember listening to one that won, and I was it was a completely emotionless experience for me. But that night we saw Elliot Fisk play, and Elliot Fisk was bringing people to tears. And now when I look at the online communities for classical guitar, of course, this was more than 20 years ago that we saw him play. They hate Elliot Fisk. They think he's garbage because he misses notes, or he reads off of sheet music, or he breaks the sound of his guitar. He just attacks it so hard. He does these things with his playing that, his passion comes out of his music, but people hate it because it's not perfect. So the pressure in that social media situation is going to be that, but amplified to pretty much all different kinds of guitar. It has to be perfect. It has to be completely rhythmically perfect. It has to be like robotic. It has to sound like a robot playing it. And to me, that's not super interesting. And it's really not interesting to see someone play like a highly technical guitar part for 1 minute, right? I want to see people play a whole concert. And this was a thing I realized with people that were doing well in guitar competitions, is that they couldn't play gigs. I know that seems weird. Like, how could they be a guitar competition finalist? Well, they only know 3 pieces, right? Or they know a couple of pieces and they're really good at them. But if I was like, oh, you want to play an hour over here? They're like, I don't have an hour of music. It's like, how do you not have an hour of music and play at this high level? Well, I've just been focusing on these 3 pieces this year. It's like, okay, how are you going to translate that into some revenue, dude? You got to get out and gig, right? Whereas I had hours of music, so I could go and play for, I think, 2 hours without repeating anything. Yeah, I'd be reading music. I'd be, maybe playing simple pieces that were below my level, I guess. But, I could get out there and fill up a lot of time with music. And no, it wasn't perfect, because it's really hard to play for like 2 hours, even if you are playing things that aren't hard and never make a mistake. So of course there's going to be mistakes, and you just have to learn to live with those. And what I realized through my experience, and this influenced a lot of what I have to say about perfection in the book Keys to Prolific Creativity, which maybe I'll link it down below. I don't know if I have a copy near me, but one of the rules in there is avoid perfectionism. One of the things I realized is that they don't have, like, the regular listener, the casual listener is not the aspiring professional guitar player who's going to the guitar competitions and listening to ferret out any mistake that their competition is making. They're just there to enjoy the music. And if the music is passionate, if it's beautiful, if it makes them feel things, if it has those great moments, then they're going to come away feeling good about that music. Even if there's a mistake here or there, you miss a chord, there's a couple dead notes, there's nail clicks or something, they filter that stuff out, or string noise. They just are not hearing the mistakes. And if you forget a part and you jump ahead, you forget a phrase, as long as it's smooth, they're not going to notice it because they don't have the sheet music in front of them. So I used to make a joke that, like, performance is an art of deception, like performance on the guitar. You're trying to convince people that it's a perfect performance, but it never can be. Even when and the higher level you go, the more you realize how imperfect your playing is, where it's like, man, I meant to do this phrase quieter than that phrase, but they were like the same volume. I messed that up, right? And to the casual listener, they just heard one volume and they didn't really think about that. They're not thinking about that kind of stuff at all. So that's something that I realized through my experience of performing, just doing a lot of performance and getting a lot of feedback from the audience and paying attention to how people responded and what music they responded to. I figured out a lot of my really hard technical pieces that I was so proud that I could play, the audience just did not give 2 craps about. What they wanted was they wanted they liked Lagrima and they liked Romanza. They didn't really care about some, like, burning fast Jorge Morel piece or something. They just didn't care about it. Like, it wasn't what they cared about. They liked the Villalobos, but they didn't care about whatever technical thing that you can think of that you wanted to play. It just wasn't something they cared about. They cared about the beauty of the music, and that was a really important lesson. Now, going back to some of the stuff that I've talked about here, time is a zero-sum game. So if you are trying to polish your piece to absolute perfection, you're going to be missing out on all kinds of other growth that you could have by learning more music and growing that way. Especially if you're a composer, being able to learn lots of different kinds of pieces on your guitar is going to help you come up with new ideas. So you're missing out on kind of the breadth of music. It's good to polish things. And I always want to have a performance that's polished if I can, but I know it's not going to be perfect. So the whole avoid perfectionism thing, my thesis in the book was that a big part of it is its vulnerability. People are afraid of being negatively judged. Well, let me tell you, I have done things that were pretty darn close to perfect, and I still get negatively judged from it. I've had people complain that my drum parts aren't quantized enough. I've had people complain about anything you can imagine that a normal person's probably not even going to pick up on. I've had people complain about my music or my writing or anything else. And, you're going to get a 1-star review. I tell that to new authors. It's like, you're going to get a 1-star review, and you just have to be prepared for that, because it's going to happen. It doesn't matter how many times you revise that book. But what people get stuck doing is they're revising the same book for 10 years. They're rewriting it and revising it because they are afraid of people thinking that it's not good enough. They're afraid of that negative judgment. They think if I just redo it enough times, it'll be good. What they actually should have done, and I talk about this in the book, is rather than trying to revise their first book 10 times, they need to put that book aside, put it in the drawer, don't look at it for a while, write a new book. They need to write more books. They need to work on book number 2. They need to write another book. They need to write more stories, short stories, provided that you read short stories. If you want to write short stories, you need to be reading short fiction, guys. Don't think like, well, short fiction's easy and you've never read it. You won't do well at that, right? Read it and write it, write more stories. Just do more writing. You just got to get the suck out. You got to practice more. So it would be better than trying to rewrite your first book a bunch of times to just write more books. That will help you grow so that by the time you come back to your first book to revise it, you have grown so much as a writer, you're able to properly revise that book. You're able to see what you did wrong. You're able to think of ways to improve it that you just won't be able to unless you have had that experience, that you've gone out and done it. Same thing with performance on any instrument. You're not going to get, if you're afraid of the gig and you never get to the gig because you're afraid people will think you suck, then you'll never get good at gigging. I've had some bad performances in my life too. And as much as I cringe at some of my bad performances, it's like I had the balls to get out and perform and fall flat on my face. And I learned from that experience how you actually have to be prepared for a performance and what kind of things can go wrong. You learn all those little things. You got to get out and do it. So if you want to be good at playing out, you need to play out. You need to play some gigs. You need to figure out how to do that. Even if they're not paying gigs, you got to get that experience down to figure it out. So it's a zero-sum game. While you're trying to polish that turd, you are missing out on a whole lot of growth that could be happening otherwise. And that's, I guess, my general statement here. I wonder, where does this drive for perfection come from? And I want to explain this a little bit because I think it comes from not just the pressures of social media, but the expectations of younger people who are just not used to live music. They're just not used to live music. So they're not used to the energy of live music, and they're not used to the mistakes that happen in live music. I realized this years ago. I went to a Black Sabbath concert and I sat with people and they were upset that Tony Iommi was not playing the solos from the record. And I was like, of course he doesn't. Like they were improvised. He's a blues player. There's all kinds of improvisation. It was with Dio. Ronnie is doing improv. Geezer's not playing the solo from the record, right? Like, there's a whole drum solo section. Like, what is this about? Okay, you're not used to seeing live music, right? This is standard stuff at a live rock concert. But the younger generations, the main way that they experience music is recorded music. And as time has gone on, pretty much everybody's main way that they experience music is recorded music, not live music. Remember, before the invention of the record player, all music had to be live music. Maybe player pianos don't count. That's kind of an intermediate idea there, but everything had to be live. So the mistakes, the little things that happen in live music, people just sort of learn to accept them. They go with the flow on live music. But when we have a record, and then once records we had this transition where you would have a band playing live and like cutting wax, to a band playing live on tape, to individual tracks, multi-tracking the drums on one part of the tape and the vocals on another, and cutting and re-recording and making these really perfect studio sounds starting in the 60s. Probably like Good Vibrations is a perfect example of what is made in a studio. It's a studio sound. It's not what live music sounds like. Once you have this really polished, perfect kind of ideal state for music, that becomes the expectation, to the point where a really high level band, like I think John Petrucci and Steve Vai may have done this with one of the G3 concerts. They went back and re-recorded parts where there were mistakes for the official recordings because they just couldn't stand those mistakes being on the tape. And it's like, Yeah, because you don't want people to be like, "Oh, he messed up. He played mistakes." Well, yeah, it happens. You can't get these perfect performances, perfect performances down. So you have you more and more younger people. They go to the concert wanting to hear the CD, and they're not going to bars. There's fewer live acts at bars. And if you're looking at Gen Z doesn't drink, so they're not going to go see live acts at the club or the bar. Almost everything they hear is recorded, pre-recorded music. So when they go to a concert, they want to hear something that sounds like the pre-recorded thing that they're used to. That's their expectation. And it just creates a really unrealistic expectation for live music, and also has the potential to rob live music of the energy and the thing that makes live music really worth seeing live. You know, you have bands now, and this is a big thing in the metal scene, where they come in and they're playing with a click track, and they're playing live with the click track and trying to keep everything like completely perfect. And that's great if that's what you want. But I like Sabbath, okay? I like a band that gets out there and grooves and plays with each other, and the tempo's flexible, and they're willing to play with a little faster tempo, a little more energy here, and they're pull things back here. They give room to the guitar player to play a little bit longer solo, or let's let the bass breathe a little bit more here. Let the bass player go off, improvise a new part. Those sorts of experiences are becoming fewer and far between, and I think the next crop of musicians also start to lose those skills. They don't practice jazz, they don't practice blues, so the idea of just being able to get on stage with three other guys and jam, which is totally how I would experience band playing 20 or 30 years ago, that's a foreign world to a lot of players now, and it's unfortunate. They just have lost. It's improvisation starting to be a lost art, and I think live music as a response to the audience, is a conversation between musicians and a response to the audience in the jazz and blues tradition. I think we're starting to lose that, and that's where a lot of those unrealistic expectations come from, to the point where people are miming their guitar parts for live performances because it's just everybody's got their phone out. Every note is going to be recorded. You can't get away with a mistake. Somebody's going to be like, "Oh, I thought he was a great player, and here he was messing up this 30-second note run that I can play 1 out of 100 times at home." I don't know. Leave me your thoughts down below. Happy to hear them. I wrote an article about this. This is a little bit too long, but I go into way more detail sometimes when I just unleash and talk in a video. So hopefully those anecdotes have been entertaining. Check out my book, Keys to Prolific Creativity. Help master your creative process. Avoid perfectionism is a big one. You got to get out there and take the risk of having people not like what you're going to do, because someone's not going to like it. And you just got to learn to live with that. And hopefully you have real people in your life that love you enough that it's not going to hurt you too bad when someone says that you suck. All right. Have a great one. See you next time.